Hey everybody, today we have Spaceman and Corelli. Unfortunately, we could not get the fraud mobile here today, but we brought its drivers. How are you guys doing today?
Fantastic. Another beautiful day on the rock, as I always say.
Doing good. Good announcements coming out all on the timeline, so I'm having a good day. I'm excited for the major this week. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, who do you guys think takes it if it's not K Corp? So I'm gonna remove the easy answer.
I mean, it's LG clearly. So
Yeah, I mean, you're asking the
that is the
wrong
next one.
guys, all right?
It's gonna be fun though. I mean, like the top four in Europe, and then G2 and Genji. I think like that top six mix is gonna be some of the best Rocket League we're gonna see. So it really could be a toss up between K Corp and BDS or Genji. I think.
Yeah, I'm liking Falcons. I think that they've
Yeah.
got the play style to that's almost like anti-meta to Europe. And so I'm
Mm.
wondering to see how Europe reacts to that.
I think Falcons will be good. I think Falcons will probably push top four. I don't know. I have so much confidence in a lot of the European teams that it's really tough for me to go any other way. Like I personally would pick K Corp, and I don't even
Yeah.
know if it's close in my mind for right now. Like I just think they're so good, and I think they're going to get better on land. And so it's tough for me to pick anyone outside of that. But I also don't give like G2 that big of an outside of a chance either. I know I've been on the European propaganda train for a couple months now, but for me, it's like I always say, I've said this for years. It's like you just don't bet on NA, no matter how good they look, because the track record kind of shows how good. If you were a betting man, you'd make a lot of money just betting against NA every single time, at least in RLCS lands, because it's never been there. Even in our best lands, like season 7 was probably one of the best world championships that North America has shown, and we still couldn't even win it. So it's like I can't until I start winning consistently. It's tough for me to really put my money on them.
Falcon's a good shout. I also want to give some love to Rule One, just because of obviously like last season was a big breakout for the org. But I spent like 4 hours the other day watching Nupo play ones
Mhm.
over on Johnny's stream, and one of the discussions that was being had while the ones was playing was how quickly Nupo has just elevated himself to be like the fastest player on the field. Like he
Mhm.
across the region, he is considered the fastest, and the no wasted movement's been a big talking point. If Nupo just shows up, you have Amon and Khaled rounding out that roster. Like Rule Ones, I feel like or a team, excuse me, that could easily hit top six if they get in stride. Like the way that Nupo is playing just
Mhm.
by himself, like it's scary as hell. So I'm very much looking forward to that team and for him to kind of get like his first LAN experience. I think it's going to be a good year for Rule One.
Yeah, and I mean on top of that, like you have two players that were top 8 in the world last year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
there's a reason they got that far, and honestly, they looked the best against Vitality. Like if you go back and watch that series, like I forget who was casting it, but there was quite a few moments where it's like, and the net's wide open, and no one's there to shoot it. It's like,
Are you talking about the
yeah,
Vitality at Boston?
no, at Worlds.
Oh. Yeah,
don't
I mean,
remember.
I mean, Vitality though at that time, like even
Yeah,
when the nets were open for them, it seemed like Destiny was on their side. Like they
yeah,
just nobody was scoring. So
yeah. They had plot armor.
yeah, basically.
What do you think? Who are like your dark horses? The like people who maybe not on paper could win it all, but are weird enough that they could make a
I think
deep run.
I think the obvious answer for me is looking at some of the SAM teams like a Furia or something
Hmm.
like that. I don't know how far Furia will go. I know honestly it's very strange about SAM. I really like the way Furia played in South America.
Hmm.
Wasn't perfect, but I mean they were the best team. But it's funny to then go and read what other people are talking about, and even some of the more hardcore Sam fans aren't like as big on the Furia hype. I'm not saying Furia is going to come out and win, but I do think that Furia is good enough to surprise people, and I do think Land's kind of a different beast too.
Hmm.
And out of all of the regions, the South Americans, I mean, they get maybe
Oh
them
yeah.
and like OCE get the most hype, maybe the biggest. Like I don't want to say land buff because that's kind of lame
Hmm.
now, but like I do think they kind of level up their mentalities. And so, yeah, I would give the nod to Furia. It's really tough for me to go and like, I don't know, start giving it to like an OCE team and stuff like that. I have nothing against OCE. I think that there are some great players over there and some great teams, but I just can't see how they're going to catch up to Europe in particular, seems like they're just taking an extra step forward from everyone else that's getting better practice than them. So it's like, and same thing for like APAC and obviously for SSA as well. It's just like they're not there yet, right? Especially for APAC and SSA, and I can't. I'm not gonna be that delusional. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna be that delusional. At least not yet.
Yeah, like I think like the big thing with like APAC and SSA, and I would say like OCE is starting to move out of that point. Like they just don't have the infrastructure and like the staffing behind them that the other regions do. Like if you look at MENA, if you look at Europe, if you look at NA, and even SAM to a certain extent, like they've got the bigger orgs backing them and not just in name. Like Vitality, K Corp, like they're basically living a boot camp, so to speak.
Yeah.
And they've got nutritionists, they've got personal trainers, like they're doing everything to set up their players for success. And that's something that the expansion regions don't have yet.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, infrastructures. I think it encompasses a lot of different things, and it's they don't have access to the same level, obviously, of competition that like Europe has. Like if you're just talking domestically, Europe, NA, OCE is near the bottom of that list just because of the lack of teams, but the open format helps cultivate more talent. It helps raise the floor. I know people hate that phrase for some reason. They're like, you can't raise the floor. I'm like, yes, you can, that by having an open field. Like that's how you get people to get naturally better at the game. But I mean, they're going to catch up. It's just going to take them longer because of the amount of hurdles in their way. But like if they were practicing against NAEU, Sub-Saharan Africa, SAM for like 6 months straight, I'm sure they would look way better on land. They just don't have access to those teams, those players, those play styles. So, they can only work on the sample size they got. So it's just going to take time for them to get better.
I think, having the org, the money, the backing, the psychologists, the, ecologists, all of the gists.
Well, those.
I think it's important and it certainly does help a team, but I think the majority of it in my mind comes down to the competition they play. It's just, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. And I actually really loved, I saw some clips of when Graybeard was on the First Touch podcast, and he wasn't, he didn't necessarily go on there and saying, oh, boohoo, SSA sucks. And there's nothing we can do about that. What he said was, I think it's a great opportunity. And he wants, European players that are coming over to SSA to come over and help make the region better, teach the young up and comers, the next generation of SSA players who are going to be on the, front and center stage of RLCS, especially after this first generation gets phased out. And I think that's a really smart approach. And obviously it's going to be, you're not really going to get the cream of the crop coming over from Europe or even NA, because that's what we've seen so far. But you're going to get, competitive players, and the hope would be that they would help grow the region, whether they mean to or not. Whether or not they're there for a vacation doesn't really matter. If they're good and they're competing against SSA players or even APAC or whatever, I think it's good for the growth of the region to get better. And eventually, the regions will grow. Like Spaceman said, I think there's a world where they do get there. I don't know how long it's going to take. You don't get the same type of reps that you do for there's a reason why Sam and MENA, aside from already having larger player bases, which is another discussion, like MENA has the third largest player base in Rocket League. It's just something I don't know if people talk about a lot, and Sam also does. And then both those regions have access to EU for MENA and NA for Sam. Granted, pings suck, but that's a talking point that's been said a million times, but it's true and it helps. I've played against a bazillion Sam players on NA. I mean, they have infested the North American servers, and for good reason. I mean, there's better players there and better practice.
Yeah, I think that's also like the thing people don't talk about that much is like that ping difference is what defined the way they became good players and defined their play styles. And like contrasting Sam and MENA, Sam, because they were playing on low ping, you couldn't hesitate, and you just had to basically double commit or
Yeah.
pre-jump this hyper aggressive
They're
style.
like Goku with the weights on, man. They go to land,
Yeah.
they take them off. You're like, what the hell? Yeah, just
And then you
they're
get
that good.
and then you get Mina, who to solve that ping difference, instead of being there first, they got so good at reading where the ball was going to land and getting
Mhm.
that perfect first touch that, you know, you had Khaled coming up in the one scene, you know, and that like
Mhm.
defined the Mina style of play.
Yeah, and OCE,
They don't have that.
OC.
Yeah.
Yeah,
have
well,
that,
it's
yeah.
like, I mean, and just like more simply, like they won't have the style that is uniquely theirs until they get to a point where the reps are then are matching the amount of games they're playing. They don't have that yet. So, yeah, time will happen to them.
Well,
So-
and I think it's important too that you know, when you look at the last 4 years of Rocket League,
Mhm.
you know, well, okay, I have two different things I want to say here, but the last 4 years of Rocket League, you have basically RLCS lands. That's it.
Mhm.
And you know, before we had like the DreamHack circuit, for example, just that alone was like an extra couple lands, right? A year, at least one extra land a year, and they would have a circuit that everyone kind of knew was going to happen. And I think having more of those types of lands, especially going forward, now that like, you know, the season's a little bit more refined, is going to help these regions if they're able to get out there and compete in some of these like kind of third party stuff, right? We have Gamers 8 and stuff like that, but it's not fully 3v3. And I think players have a different mentality going in. It's a great event, but just completely different when it comes to the normal stuff. So like dream hacks, and you know, we have had Wii plays, and you know, all of these things that even like the BTSs of old, right? So all of these things I think help, because anytime you can kind of get out of your house, right, out of your backyard into someone else's backyard, especially for like OCE and APAC and SSA, I think that'll grow, and I'm hoping that there's space for that. Which leads me to what I was going to say just a moment ago, was that for me, I think anytime there's an extended break, it's going to hurt those regions. Like we had a huge break in between the last LAN and this LAN, and they just don't get those. They haven't had a boot camp, as not that I'm aware of, in any other region until if they made LAN, of course. And I think that hurts. You know, OCE has been famous for saying that like the most improvement they've ever gotten is when they go to LAN and they do that week-long boot camp in NA or EU, and the team grows. And I think that's fantastic. I think that's a great thing. That's a totally normal thing in esports too, by the way. The amount of people in League of Legends who fly over to Korea to get better from NA, from EU, from across the world, just to play Korean players, to get better. It's insane. And that's a totally normalized thing. We shouldn't like, it shouldn't be the outlier. It should be the norm. Like I wouldn't be surprised if you started seeing players go to like Europe or just France to start like boot camping, like just to get better in the off season. It takes like a collective, I think, team mentality to like say, hey, we need to get better practice. Let's go somewhere to get better practice. Even if it's just to scrim European teams that seem to be pulling away, right? Like I think that's valuable to teams. And I personally think that's the next step for a lot of teams too, but it's expensive. And I know there's some cost, it's cost prohibitive, but I think that's a next big jump for a lot of practice in Rocket League.
Yeah, I think that's, you say that and we're scrimming moist right now. It helps having two players actually be from Europe though.
Yeah.
So AJ's playing on high ping. But like that's the
Good, let them.
Yeah. But no, like that's a, you know, playing into that, you know, going over to Europe, like what about Europe, in y'all's opinion, makes them the better region? Like, other than like they just have Zen, they have Vatira, they have better players. Like, what is it about Europe that makes it better?
I have two ideas. They're probably not right, but I have two ideas. I think the first is coverage. I think that Europe, all players on Europe are capable, and this is not an indictment on NA, and it's not saying that NA doesn't do this. It's just the first things that stand out to me when watching Europe is all players are capable of covering one another in the 1s, 2s, and 3s spot at all times, and they can transition from defense to offense, and then the permutations of their offense spread from each individual player because of that coverage. Like if you watch K Corp or Vitality last season or BDS this season versus a lot of teams in NA, the one thing that continuously stands out is how quickly on ball, on defense, midfield, and offensively, how quickly the numbers in Europe are covering one another. Whoever has the ball, who's filling in the space? Where's the gap? What's that mean if somebody's rotating back out of position? Like it's something Arsenal's talked about on his stream, but Europe's coverage of one another on the field is at the moment a step ahead of NA, which if your cover's a step ahead, it means that if you're reading the ball more quickly, you can get in and out of different coverage packages and get in and out of different offensive styles much more quickly than the defense can adapt to, which is why you see the offense look so fast and why in NA it seems like sometimes the offense tends to stall when it gets the ball upfield and they run out of ideas.
Mhm.
And the second thing, I don't subscribe to the idea of, well, France is obviously community is a big thing and culture is a big thing and there's differences to both regions, but I don't subscribe to the idea that, well, it's everybody's closer together in France, so they just play better versus NA is much more spread out. I don't think that's the case. I think that there is just this there's this incentive in North America for a lot, and this is not Rocket League specific. There's a lot of esports where it's we want the superstar, we want the one person who can be the face of the org, the face of the team, who's that guy or gal, and they step up, they do the thing. Like we want a first killer to be the guy. We want apparently Jack when they moved to NA to be the guy. We want an AJ to be the guy, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, and sometimes the individualistic play styles of NA that everybody loves and that we all ask for can sometimes get in the way of a team-oriented progression. And so you look at EU, they have those people, but not by default. They kind of explode into the role and they carry everybody else with them. Vatira is maybe the or Vatira and Zen, the best two examples. Like they came on with all this promise of being this individual great talent, and they elevated everybody else around them. Like Vatira has done that his whole career. Zen quite literally made Radosin like a borderline Hall of Fame player last season.
Mhm.
So I think that is a little bit more obscure of a point than the original, but I do think the individual mindset of NA sometimes hinders us. But really, it's the play style of Europe. I think the coverage that they have over one another on ball and how quickly they make those reads together as a team. I mean, just look at what K Corp did last season when they were playing at Worlds. Like they were out positioned on every single touch every single time. Or, excuse me, they were out positioning teams on every single touch every single time at the World Championship up until they played Vitality. Like nobody came close.
Mhm.
Cheeves and I were on the Gen G K Corp series. It was one of the biggest, like, you are not supposed to be playing this Genji, you are bad moments I've ever seen in Rocket League. It was so one-sided because K Corp were everywhere all the time, always. And to me, that was like, okay, that's the difference. It was literally NA's best versus Europe's second best, and Europe's second best was beating the piss out of NA. It was just not close. So the coverage is for me a big thing. I just think that separates EU.
I don't want to say exactly what Spaceman just said, but I'm actually going to steal a line from what Nick has told me.
Let's go.
And I really liked what he told me here, and I think he's actually very, very right about this. Is that if you look at the influences that NA has had on their biggest stars, or rather what the biggest stars have had their influence across North America, and you look at like what players are looking up to in North America when it comes to like an NRG, right? Who was like at the top of the mountain for a very long time, at least in the perception. What was their play style? Well, it was mostly don't go for the ball and wait for the other team to make a mistake, right? And I think that influenced a lot of other players to play something like that because NRG made it work. NRG was owning NA doing that. That play style worked up until like a year and a half ago, at least in NA. I think it's changing now. And granted, I do think that NA is evolving out of this. But you look at the influences that a lot of the up and coming NA teams have had, and you try and model the best. And NRG's the best team, and there are other teams that did that too. It wasn't just NRG. Yeah. But you're modeling something that just got outdated. And that's not necessarily like NRG's fault or the North American players' fault, because it did work. I mean, NRG's won a world championship. NRG's always been in the talk, in the mix. They've always been at the top of NA up until, like a year and a half ago. So it's like, it's not that they didn't get results, but it wasn't beating the best most of the time, especially when they went international. And eventually players got too good where it's like, okay, what happens in this style if nobody makes a mistake, right? What happens if they're not making those mistakes? And I think that's where that play style really fell apart. Whereas I don't think EU had the same established play style. So it was a lot more chaotic. There was a lot more evolution, I think, that happened in Europe faster than NA. I think now you're kind of seeing a small renaissance of that in the NA world now. But still, I think it's still very prominent, especially with like bubble teams. I'll never forget, like, I've talked to Garrett quite a bit about play styles and stuff like that, just randomly in Discord. And he says, he's like, yeah, the biggest thing about NA teams, especially bubble teams, is like, you just wait for them to like mess up and then they just like leave the net open because they just like don't know where to go. Right? They don't know what to do when it all falls apart. And that's the NRG play style, right? It's the capitalize on your mistakes. And you leave the net open because you overcommitted like a season 7 or 8 SAM team, right? So I think I don't want to say it was a bad influence. It was just an influence on the perception of what's a good team in North America that became outdated. And I don't think Europe had a similar thing. I also think it's just fair to say that there's been a lot better players coming out of Europe as of late than NA, just plain and simple. And again, I think that has influence over the overall arching player base. It's not that EU's rank necessarily is going to be leagues better than NA or something like that, or like there's no toxicity. I mean, it's probably even more toxic, But I do think that there is a different influence over European players and what's expected of them in rank than the influence that has hit NA over the last few years. That's now changing, but still I think has done its damage. I don't want to paint it in a bad light because it did work, but it is outdated now.
Yeah, like I would say, like going into this major, like as far as like stylistically speaking, OG is the only North American team stylistically. Like, because you have G2 and Gen.G that they operate out of some form of cover 2 for the most part. You have LG who's playing what I would classify as more like a spread offense. Reddles is almost always at the midfield, whether it's offense or defense.
Yeah.
Like he's
or further.
Yeah. Like they've always got somebody at the midfield that no matter if it's offense or defense, like there's somebody there that they can pivot off of or like disrupt the transition. And that's not something NA is known for at all. I mean, just take a look at, OG, like they rotate deep back post, like they will sit in net. And if you don't hit your shots, you lose. But the thing is they give you shots.
They are also one of the, like, just on paper, they are like you'd consider them one of the slower teams. I mean, like their fastest player is Noli, and he's their midfielder. So like, it's just that construction when it came out, everybody was questioning. Like we all knew they were going to be good. There was no question about whether OG were going to be good. We all knew they would be. It was just, could they keep up, surprisingly, with the pace of NA? And yeah, I think you're right. Like they are maybe like one of the most fundamental heavy teams going into the major that are like the best representatives of a little bit of that old play style. Deep back post. Their defense is super, super top heavy. But the one thing that OG never had until like as of late before they qualified for the major was like they had no midfield. Like Corelli and I were watching them in tactical banditry. We were watching them in week 1. They had, and granted they had a sub at that time, but like we expected this team. You have Calm up, you have Calm demoing upfield, you'd hope. You have JNAPS and you have Noli. There is no reason this team should not be a midfield powerhouse. And the fact they didn't have one was like, okay, clearly something's wrong. Give them some time. And eventually they started figuring it out. But that's the thing is like they are, it feels like they are so good at being able to kind of 3-stack and wait on the goal line that they are a dangerous team. I think OG is a bit of a sleeper hit. They are a very dangerous team on land because of how quickly they can explode upfield. And people forget that when Noli's been disrespected, he tends to show up. So yeah, that's going to be a fun look against Europe, what OG can actually bring to the table, because you're never going to bet against JNAPS and Noli on land. It's just not going to happen. So
I want to add, was it Flip and Spin that he like subbed in for and like won?
Yep.
I want to add to kind of a tangent, but you were talking about the classic like deep rotation NA style back post baloney. I hate that. I've been saying, not that I'm a pioneer in this, but I've just been on the record many times saying like I really dislike anyone being taught like back post rotations, like as a default. I think there's obviously plenty of times and places for it, and obviously it's the safe way to play if you're like very mechanically bad. But when we're talking about like pro player and stuff like that, back post rotations I think are like the bane of every NA team early on, because they were just trying to play so safe, almost like a defense first type of thing. And I think that, again, I talked about like a small renaissance, a small change in North American play. I think a big reason for that is ball side rotation, just rotating towards the ball, layering your defense all the way back. Not invoking your third man immediately to try and slow down the play. No, it's like it's using your first man to try and cut off first, not pushing your third man immediately in, and then now you have a wide open backfield. I think NA teams have done a lot better to change that. Maybe Gen G was one of those teams that helped that early on. There's probably plenty of examples, but I think that's another big difference between NA and EU that's, I think, been pretty apparent over the seasons, and now I think is changing for NA at least, is that they're kind of learning, okay, we don't just rotate back post as default, and that you can layer your defense a little bit more, have a little bit more dynamics in your defense than just, okay, I lost the ball, I'm going back now.
Yeah. Like, I think like the big thing now, without getting like into too much of like what we do, but like it's really not so much, hey, make a play and hope second man behind you reads it, and then third man just stay safe just in case it all blows up in our face. Like that's the mean way of putting like the NA play style. You know, it's like play best case, play worst case scenario. It's like, well, how often does best case actually happen? It's like, well, 5% of the time. So you want to be useless 95% of the time as second man?
I think, I mean, I could be completely off base, but if tying this into the discussion we had earlier, it does feel like at times NA can default back to that, like, it feels like at times NA can be very, very bad at improvising out of situations. Like they'll fall back to, okay, who takes the ball now? Like now the third man needs to do this. Now I need to, instead of, again, over in Europe where it feels like no matter where the situation is, one, they're just better at chasing. They're way better at like the first man just making the play. But when somebody, let's say that when they get to a point where the play starts to break down, and then you would think they would revert to, okay, where do I go here? And what does this person then do? They don't do that. They just, somebody goes, makes the play, and then everything else, like the line of code runs down and they just start working through it in the moment versus just kind of pulling back and waiting. It feels like that's also part of the difference, is just NA are still working through that, like, let's follow the textbook example of what we do, and EU is like, oh, dude, we're already hitting the ball, and then screw the textbook, like we're gonna do this, this, and this, and if this doesn't work, then we do this, but then if we get a chance, then we'll fall back and hit the fundamentals. But it just seems like there are times where NA gets stuck in that thought pattern of we're thinking through the play rather than just reacting and playing, and sometimes it doesn't feel like we trust ourselves. I don't know. It's NA's weird. Like we have really, really great players all the way around, but sometimes it's like we're scared to like make a big play, make a decision on the field, and it hinders us. But I don't know. I'm a yapper.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like NA's been too scared to try and innovate.
Sure.
And so it's kind of left them in the spot where EU, like if you look at all the different teams like EU had like in the past like 2 to 3 years, you go back and you watch some of the teams, you're like, man, well, they were doing something really dumb here, but they were trying stuff. It's like, as opposed to NA, it's been, all right, everybody at NA plays like this. They expect me to play like this. And it's just a matter of me being able to 1v3 slightly more often than everybody else. And that's how I'm going to make it to pro versus, hey, let's as a team experiment and let's try something dumb and see if it's not as dumb as we think it is. Okay, it was as dumb as we think it is. All right, let's try something else.
Sure.
Or like,
yeah. I think
there's more experimentation in Europe. And that's why I think like you see more blowouts, it feels like. But that's also why you see teams like SUS still being able to, win a best of 5 series against K Corp. Is because everybody's experimenting and trying stuff versus trying to play that safe, quote unquote, solid fundamental Rocket League.
I don't know if this is. I'm asking because I just don't know, but like we have had those moments in NA where it's where teams have just elected to kind of change things up. I mean, I think one of the biggest examples was NRG after they got knocked out of Winter Major 2022, and it was like the first time that that roster originally, when that trio,
Mhm.
like they kind of crapped the bed, and everyone's like, okay, like what's the deal with NRG? They came back around, and then for like the next year, the story was that they were changing up their play style. They were going to be a lot slower, or they were like relying way more on Justin leading the offense, or they were allowing like Squishy to start running the plays. Like they NRG was one of the first teams in NA around that time to like really change things up, and they were making it vocal. They're like, we're trying a different play style this weekend. I think the big problem is that NA tries their play styles a little bit too late into the team's lifespan. So where when they start to try to change things up, either it doesn't work because at that point the field's already just continued to grow marginally, but the play style is not adapting to that. Or it's just at that point, like the roster needs to change. Like by the time Garrett and Squishy and Justin were trying to change up the play style, this is a team that had been together for what, 2 years? They won a world championship. They as a group were not able to compete with the rest of NA at that point. And so they tried to change it a little bit too late, and then they wasted a year doing really nothing. And I feel like that happens in NA sometimes, where it's like, okay, we could try to get creative, try to change things up, but you need a buffer. Like you can't come in one weekend. Like LG did it this season. They're like, hey, we're gonna try something different with our offense. We're gonna try to do a couple of things, and we went to round 5. We almost got destroyed. Like we didn't have a great weekend, and it's not that the change wasn't good, but if NA tries to change up their play style, they give themselves a 1 week buffer. And it's like, if it doesn't really work out in that first week, it feels like we don't necessarily follow up on that. We're like, well, it didn't really work. So we're going to just go back to what we did before against the NA in the field. And I just think either you need more time and you need to do it in a more efficient manner. So you're not doing it in the middle of a season, or you need to do it early on in the game, early on in the season, where the meta hasn't been established yet, because it seems like people do it reactively rather than proactively. And then you get caught in this tailwind of just spinning out as the season progresses.
I
Yeah.
I think well, first of all, I think if we talk to any of those old heads, they'd probably disagree with us on most of this. I do think that is a lot. It's a lot of specific issues for a specific team. But I'll throw my hat in there and say that if I'm on one of those teams, especially like back in the Big Three era, you're in such a weird spot because you can do what you're doing and stay at the top. They were able to do that for so many seasons. Why would you want to jeopardize yourself against teams that may, for whatever reason, whether it's less quality players or less practice, whatever. But clearly the big 3 of NA were way better than everyone else for seasons and seasons and seasons. Why switch it up to jeopardize yourself against lower level teams when you know what you're doing is going to work at a domestic level? And then I'm not going to say that they did this, but you're kind of just hoping that it'll work against the European teams for this next LAN and the next LAN and the next LAN and the next world. And hopefully it comes out. Eventually it did for a couple of those teams. And for the most part, I mean, they were getting to a world championship, especially like after season 4. Like it was very back and forth, right? So there's an argument to be said that like, I mean, it was working for NA teams and like they just didn't win the big one, right? But I think that's what everyone's saying is like, well, hey, great that you went, 8-0 in league play or whatever it was back in the day. And, great that you were able to get to the finals, but for the most part, you're not winning the world championship. So I think you're in a weird spot if you're a top team, because I just feel like if you're doing so well, why would you want to change it up to the point where you might not make LAN? And that's really, at that time, I mean, that's really all you had, right? Is like you had one LAN for the whole season. So it was a lot different too.
Yeah, I think like looking back, or like if we look at it from like a region to region perspective, like if you have like theoretical perfect Rocket League and that's 100% like zero mistakes, perfect reads, you're there first all the time, etc. Like if I don't know if you've seen that like 20xx melee like Fox versus Fox, where it's like a whole like Dragon Ball Z fight.
Maybe I have seen something like that.
Yeah. Like if that is 100%, like if you take that and that's Rocket League played at 100%, like Europe has been willing to experiment, and so like this season, like they're at like K Corp's like consistently at 80 to 90%. of like this theoretical perfect Rocket League.
Mm.
But NA has been the best we can do consistently is 80 to 83%.
Mm.
But their range is much smaller. So it's like on a bad day, they're playing at 79%. On a good day, they're playing at 83%. So, like, on a bad day, they can beat a European team that's having an off day. I think what's happened, like, the past 2 seasons, like, Sathu's been more influenced by the European style. And then when Jinji came over here, that started to push the NA meta forward. And even if, like, let's say like SSG didn't get messed over by seeding this season, and they ended up making LAN. Like, even SSG is pulling away from that traditional NA meta. We definitely are. I've made sure that we didn't play like an NA team. But like, you're starting to see it now where like that old style is dropping down in those ranks. And so I think now this season more than ever, like NA is truly trying to find itself again.
Yeah.
My worry is that they just try to copy Europe and try and catch up to Europe versus, okay, Europe plays like this. Let's think about ways that beat that versus K-Corp's good, let's copy K-Corp, and then just constantly being one step behind Europe.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think that's a really good point about, coaches too. And it's not that players can't figure this stuff out on their own. I think some can't. Maybe many of them can't. But I do think that having someone that can kind of look at trends and understand trends in the game is something that I think players may not necessarily think about across the entire league. They might just think about, I mean, we've had players for so long. This is what I don't like this, and sorry for the soapbox, but one thing that I always thought was so strange was, especially even in the beginning, but even now, you still sometimes get it. Well, you'll like interview a really big player, and I mean, European players do it too, but you'll interview a really big player and they'll be like, what's your thoughts on Europe or something? And they'll be like, I don't know, I don't watch Europe. It's like, what? You're not watching like your biggest competition? Like, I understand if maybe you're not watching like some of the weaker regions, but you're not watching your biggest competition throughout a season. That blew my mind. And so I think coaches, just looping it back to the coach, I think coaches can have a huge influence for something like that, like a Sathu, like maybe getting a little bit more in tune with what's happening in Europe and trying to relay that to his players, do the work for the players, right? I think that's a big thing for a coach. That's maybe where you have your biggest impact, right? Because, obviously these players know how to play the game. So doing that extra dirty work of, scouting or whatever you want to call it on those other teams, I think is really, really important for players. And I think it's becoming a bigger, a more and more important thing. I mean, look at you guys. You guys have like a couple people now looking at the game for your team, and you're not the only team who's done that too. So, and I think there's probably a lot more people in unofficial roles that are doing that as well. LG has the same thing, right? Like we've got Kevpert along with Greg. So, I mean, I think that's good. I don't think it's a bad thing. Like more support for the players, more people who are on the players' side, who are thinking about the game with and for the players, I think is important. And it seems to me that players are becoming more and more open to that. Especially for guys like you, JC, who like, you come in, right? You're not an ex-player, right? Like you've never been on LAN or at least like an RLCS LAN, right? So it's like gaining that respect and coming in and actually making an impact. There's a lot of guys, right, that could probably do that to some degree, some better than others. But I do think that's a huge stepping point for NA in the right direction to like have someone who can aggregate the trends and try and say, where do we fit into this? How do we get better from this? And how do we also beat this going to LAN? That's a huge one.
Yeah, like that's for people who don't know, like the reason like I even got the job is I made a video on how like Jinji, and K-Corp basically played like 2 seasons ago or a season ago. Ironically, Jinji just won their first event after I put that video out. It took them a year, and so I jokingly say that I had a hand in that. But no, like that's the thing that like got people noticing me is I was just like, hey, look, this is what happens. Like this is the macro trend. I think as the esport is like nobody's doing anything now that moves the ball any faster. Like it's not moving the ball in unexpected ways. As far as like, oh, the ball is now suddenly taking like a sharp angle. Like we're
Right.
reaching the limit of where mechanics can really change the game.
Yeah.
And so now it's okay, like the macro is now more important, like the bigger scale of things. And that's a different mindset you have to think, okay, not how am I getting it past two people and handing it to their third man and then hoping my two teammates are able to commit and 2v1 that person before their two people get back in rotation. It's now, okay, like now it's really starting to become like chess where it's
Right.
okay, they're doing this, like we're expecting this. You know, what opening are we going to play today? You know, how are we
Yeah.
going to do this? Okay, they've chosen this variation, so are we prepared for that?
Right.
I think now the next step, and I know me and you have talked about this a little bit, Corelli, in the past. Just like now we just need to have like a language for like all this discussion.
Yeah, I agree.
And so that I think is the next step. Not only for NA, but just Rocket League as a whole. Like really having this in-depth, okay, like they're coming out in a cover 2, they're coming out in a stack. It's like, okay, that's like your basic formation. But okay, like what type of cover 2 are they playing? Like, you know, like what type of stack are they playing? Like what type of stretch or spread? Like what's their
Right.
like this is where I think Rocket League really starts to get fun.
Well, you can see
on
the big
tactical side of it.
a big weakness of not having the language is when you listen to the casters talk about the game because they're explaining the game the long way. Because they're like, oh, it's great what K Corp are doing. They have one guy in front and one guy in the back. And it's like, well, we could just have a name for something like that. You know, like there's a lot of those moments of like, oh, they're playing really defensive. It's such a weak way to like explain, that they're like playing a certain style. So I agree. And like I said, when you showed me
really
to
defensive.
that, but it's true.
Like 5 feet long, dude. Of course they're playing defensive.
They're playing aggressive. Calm is demoing people.
But here's the thing too. And again, from a talent perspective, I know we're not talking about from a talent perspective here, but from a talent perspective, in trying to relay information, I know everyone outside of America is going to hate this, but like in football, in American football, it's really easy to understand if you know the terms of football, what a defense is doing for an offense, or what a wildcat formation or pistol formation, right? Like or a cover 2, that's the defensive thing, like cover 2 or cover 3 or cover 0, right? Like these types of things. Really like or a spy. What is a spy? What does he do, right? And we have just terms for those things. And of course Rocket League's not going to have as many, but it makes sense. You say, okay, they're sitting in a cover 2. I now generally know what that means for a defense and what that means for an offense too, right? And you can't, as a talent, it's really tough to relay that because we don't have those terms. And so you start kind of over explaining things. And that's when talent starts just like yapping because it's like, we don't actually have a term to describe anything more than like, oh, really defensive or oh, really aggressive. Because even if we started using, these terms that, you're mentioning like stacked or cover 2, but it's not mainstream, right? So no one knows what the hell that means right now. It makes sense to me. I think it's brilliant, but I can't just start going saying that because no one's like, what the hell is a cover 2?
And then when we do say it, chat's like, oh, what do they think this is? Like the NFL? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
And everybody hates it. So yeah.
But it's the same thing in soccer, right? I mean, you've got different formations, and those give you different opportunities. I mean, I played soccer for a long time. There's a difference, right, between all the different formations and what it means to have 4 in the back instead of 5, or if you're playing 3 in the back, or stuff like that. I mean, it makes a difference, and so every sport has stuff like that. Rocket League needs something like that, and I think it's brilliant to try and name those, especially making them mainstream so that fans can understand. And of course, also when you talk to your team, being able to describe what's happening with just a term instead of over explaining it is also, I think, very beneficial.
Yeah, like it's very easy to like once you have a team that like understands like that level of things, like when I was still coaching like the college team, like we'd be in the middle of a game and I'd like see how like the opposing defense was set up and be like, hey, stack spear, and they'd be like doom, and they'd run the play and score off of it. And
Yeah.
versus me being like, hey, you get in front of the ball and demo, and this person follows up behind you and you're going to hit it off the backboard, and then
Exactly.
as this guy's rotating out, you're going to linger as an option for pass back post because they're going to try and challenge you front post. Versus, hey, stack spear. It's like,
Yep.
say that twice. It's like, make sure they hear it, and they're like, boom, execute, score a goal. It's like,
But it makes sense. And it again, obviously, as Americans, we always relate it back to American football, but it's the same thing in soccer. Like overlapping runs, give and goes, checks back down to the midfield, playing it back, then rotating it. Like these are like normal things, and they're like not set plays, but these are things that all teams practice. I remember doing a million drills of like passing it to the midfield, passing back, rotating, or rolling out to the winger and overlapping the winger, and then playing it down the line. These are things that you practice all the time. They're not set plays, but they're things that like if you
they're
get the right
general
setup,
concepts.
they're general concepts of manipulation of the game, and players are absolutely good enough to do something like this now. And it's not going to be as beautiful as soccer, right? It's not going to be one touch, two touch, 5 different players are going to get a touch and you're moving around the back line. It's not going to be as pretty as that. It's going to be way faster, and you're going to lose possession a lot because Rocket League doesn't give us the same control as soccer, or like FIFA, I guess. But it is possible. It is absolutely possible, and it's something, again, as you say, I think it's definitely a next step for a lot of teams, and I think it's already happening. I think a lot of teams might not have a term for it, but they're thinking about that, and they, I think, keep it on the lowdown. But I don't know if they really talk about it much publicly.
Yeah, like when I put out that video about Gen G, like I DM'd a bunch of coaches just like, hey, like, am I right? Am I wrong? Am I crazy? Like, what's your thoughts as somebody who clearly knows this game? And Sathu, I think, was like one of the only people to respond, like outside of Nick. And he was like, yeah, like that's pretty accurate. Like most teams are like trending in this direction or are going to get left behind.
Yeah.
Of like thinking in this way.
I think it's just one of, I think, many examples of like being able to think about the game in a different way. Because like you said, we're reaching I'm not going to say the skill ceiling or anything like that, but definitely when it comes to the manipulation of physics in the game, it's like we've kind of gotten that down. There'll be plenty of more things to come down the line. I mean, they're still figuring out things in Melee, right? So
yeah.
I'm not going to be naive and say it's figured out. But I think that, it's going to come down to how you think about the game a lot more than, okay, like, yes, of course, the quality of your player is always going to matter, right? Like, Bill Belichick isn't one of the best coaches without Tom Brady, right? But you do, I think that you can get a lot more out of your teams, and especially teams that may be struggling or teams that aren't getting the job done, as like missing out on a world championship, right? Or winning domestically and then not winning internationally. There are things that I think you can do to really change things up. So that's something that, and again, I talked about NA, I think, changing. That's one of those things that I hope does come out of maybe a small renaissance here of like maybe NA can figure something out that no one else has, or even just do something better that other people have figured out to the point where, they're starting to win again.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like the teams that are consistently top 8 this season, you've got G2, you've got Gen G. Obviously, those have been talked about like ad nauseum. Then you've got SSG, who before Sad Jr. came in, looked like one of the most chaotic teams in the worst way possible. And then the consistency wasn't quite there yet at Worlds, but there were games that, my God, they looked like one of the best teams.
Yeah.
Like, it was like, okay, it's clear how they got here. Like, they're playing like this. And they got to top 8. Obviously, me and Nick. And then, Kev Pert and Raw Greg. Like, they're really thinking about the game. Like, you're seeing teams that are consistently at the top. And then also Achieves. Can't forget about him. Like, he's come in and, I saw that team in scrims before and after, and he made a very clear impact on that team.
Yep.
I mean, what other teams are like consistent top 8? Like OG, I mean, they're all veterans and they've got Torment. I mean, they're playing the NA play style, but they're playing it, as you would kind of expect for the most part.
In NA, I mean, you really
Yeah.
have like SSG and M80 with top 8 all across the board, Pirates on a boat, and then like, I mean, Omelet finished top 8 one time. They also finished 12th. TSM maybe.
I mean, they had one good run.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the top 4 and then top 12, I guess. But
yeah, but if you look at all the teams that are like consistently making top 8, and like it's all the teams that are being coached and
yeah,
for the most part have a unique aspect to them, either
Yeah.
from that coach or just from the players.
I don't disagree. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you're right. I mean, I have my little sheet up. I'm looking at it now. LG, everything at top 8, SSG, M80. All three of those teams did not finish below top 8. Pirates on a boat finished below top 8 one time. But yeah, you're right. You're right. I didn't even think about it like that. You're absolutely right. Those teams that are getting coached like that, I mean, it's clearly working. I mean, top 8's not bad. That's not a bad result, especially when you consider the competition is the stiffest it's ever going to be, right? So especially when you have one team that's just a buzzsaw towards everyone. So yeah, you're right. I think that coaching, it pays off. And even in OG's case, like, they had obviously that first regional was not their, or event or whatever it's called, open qualifier, was not their best work. But afterwards, they got their stuff straight, and top 4s back to back is nothing to scoff at.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where, like, I think I've been saying this for probably like the past 3 years. Like the era of when coaches truly matter outside of like the mental aspect, because keeping players' mentals up, like that's obviously important. But now we're entering that season of Rocket League where the tactics are really going to start to matter.
Yeah,
and it's really going to, like, I don't think it'll be this season per se. I still think it's going to take another season or two to develop before it's really coach versus coach.
Yeah, game planning is the number one. Let me rephrase it. Game planning was the reason Vitality won last year. Everything.
Oh yeah.
Like obviously Zen is the reason they were successful, and the team played out of their mind. Like literally there was after the Vitality Falcons, after the Vitality Rule 1 series in Boston, after that series, there was not a single moment where I think anybody thought that Vitality would lose again. Like we were like, okay, this team's just going to win Boston, and if they play like this in Worlds, they're going to win Worlds. It's never been that clear cut. But they don't do that without Farah, clearly, and they don't have the success they have in Boston in the regionals and Worlds. And K Corp doesn't have the success they have currently without Farah. And it's not just the fact that he's a great coach, and not just the fact that he's a great motivator and he's great at getting his team to think about the macro. It's that he's a great game planner. Like a coach is not here to tell you how to play the game. A coach is not here to teach you how to play the game. That's not the job of an esports coach. An esports coach is simply here to find ways to get you to look at the game differently and to get you to game plan against your opponents so you go in prepared. There are a lot of times in NA where you see a team that's just woefully underprepared. Looking back at like Gen G and Worlds, they were woefully underprepared against K Corp and they got their behinds beat. So like the difference is not going to be who's hitting the ball harder. And like the difference is now at this stage in mechanics, the difference is now no longer like who's going to triple flip reset, because you can't game plan against that. Like people are just going to pull that out on a whim if they decide that's what they want to do. You're not going to be saying, okay, well we need somebody on our team who can musty flick off the ceiling and that's how we win. That's not how you win now. It's not about who hits the ball harder. It's literally, are you game planning against the right teams in the right way? And the mechanics will come out in moments if you have the game plan as a team under control. Like K Corp is as effective as they are because they are one of the best team-oriented they are one of the best team-oriented teams on the planet. And then when things break down or they have the space to do so, that's when you see Vatira like holding his reset and breaking a defense down, or that's when you see Zen doing whatever. Like we've gotten to that point where it's no longer mechanics. That's not the ceiling anymore. The ceiling is Now, can you work within the micro of the game, and can you change the timings? Can you disrupt what the defense is thinking? Can you disrupt how somebody's going to challenge the ball in rotation? Like it's like you said earlier, it's like the chess game. Like if we have stage 1, 2, and 3 of how Rocket League goes, now can you work with in between the stages, and can you disrupt how people expect you to hit the ball? Can you change how you're going to use your reset to like create an advantage? Just that all comes down though. All that is available based on how you game plan and how you prepare. And the best coaches in the world are going to be the ones who have their team ready for anything that comes up and then trusting their team to execute. Like there'll definitely be series this year, maybe even this upcoming major this week, where like you can beat anybody on land, especially on like Thursdays and
Oh
Fridays.
yeah.
Anybody can lose. It's so obvious. Anybody can lose on the Thursday and Friday. But the teams that struggle to get warmed up, if they are properly prepared, if they've practiced the right way, if they came in understanding what they need to do, they can have mistakes, but their coach trusts them and they know what to do in situations to get out of it and to reset the board and to
Hmm.
win the game. So it's like just the coach's job here is to just make sure that the players understand that it's not the mechanics that are going to win you the game. It's just the game planning, the execution. How prepared are you to go in? That's how LG won a lot of their series this year. It was like LG are not mechanically more like some like Magic Bear Cheese, they can pop off, but at times LG are not more mechanically gifted than G2. But the reason we played G2 so close for so many games was because we game planned really well against them. Like Greg knows what to do against G2. So it's just that's where coaches are going to be. I think the next big thing, like you've talked about, is it's no longer like who's going to be the best mechanical player. It's going to be who has the best support system around them to help them see the game differently. And then when things happen, trust the players to make crazy plays if they need to. But game planning is massively undervalued across the board. And I think a lot of NA teams would love to have coaches like they have like in Farah and Kometo. So
It does kind of beg the question, well, not beg the question, but it is a great argument. Not that I necessarily on this train, but for going back to league play, I would really be interested now, like, because obviously with the way the league works right now, you don't really know who you're going to play, especially with Swiss, and you
Oh
play
yeah.
3 matches. You know your first matchup, but after the next 2, at a minimum, you don't know, and you might play 4 more matchups that you just don't know. I'd be curious to see. That's where coaches would really have the biggest impact.
Oh
If they
yeah.
can game plan for their 1 or 2 games that they play for that week, and they know the entire week who they're
Yep.
playing, that's where you would really start to separate which coaches are doing the most work and which are not. Because I guarantee the coaches that are preparing their team properly are probably going to get a lot more out of them. And I don't think we're at that point now where we were in seasons 1 through 9, where basically, because the game was still so new, it's basically if you just had the best players, you were going to win.
Yeah.
No one knew how to play the game. No one was good enough. Most of the rival series teams really struggled, and the bottom teams were always the bottom teams. It was pretty rare to see someone go up. I think a lot of people point to like Sonic's run when they beat who was it, NRG, like in week 1, and that was a big one. And then it was just like, okay, they kind of finished exactly where we expected them to after that. Even though Shock got like MVP that season or whatever. So I'm not all for it, but I do think that league play would be very interesting to see how coaches approach that and how much of a difference they can make for their teams.
Yeah, I think it would also get just more entertaining Rocket League because now, like, just because of the format, it's all right. Let's hone in and be really good at this one specific style, and make small changes to try and beat the other team, and
Sure.
hope that we just outplay them. Versus like league play, it's like, okay, hey, like this team likes to do this, and I know this coach likes to game plan against this way, and so therefore when we play them, we're going to try and be one step ahead of them, and we're going to do this so they do this, but because we know them, we're going to expect that change, and then we're going to cut them off because they're not expecting an ego challenge from us in this situation. Like, like then it gets into that really fun
Right.
game
The mind
space.
games.
Yeah. And like if you think about like Zen's, hitting his signature shot to be the final shot of last season, that doesn't happen without the game planning that is allowed him to have full boost and the ball at midfield and space.
Right.
Like the game planning is what set up him to be mechanical, and he was going to score that goal any way he wanted to. pretty much, like, because he had that much space. It's just he happened to do it in his signature way, which I think is probably one of the most poetic moments in all of Rocket League. But man, we've had a pretty good talk about strategy and like where the game is at. But I guess we've really got to talk about the fraud mobile now.
Okay.
Like, whose idea was that? This is just a hard pivot. It's just something I really wanted to know. And I want to kind of close the podcast out with, the stuff you're doing at the LG team stream. One of my favorite parts about going 3-0 in Swiss is I get to catch the last couple minutes of you guys' stream.
We're always going around 5, babe. We got to milk the viewers, The fraud mobile was actually, so it was a combination between LG, what's his name, Spaceman, the guy who does our graphics? I forget his name right now. Ryan?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, let me pull it up while you.
Yeah. So, I'll say his name here in a second. I don't remember it, but he's done a great job. He's got like the little trash can. Ryan, yeah. He's got the little trash can for the other team's decals and stuff on our little matchup graphic. We'll be in like our beautiful decal, and then we'll put the team in like a trash can. But the fraud mobile in particular was a combination because LG initially came to us with the like car on the, I think that's a farmstead. And immediately we met with them, and then afterwards I was just talking to Spaceman. I was like, dude, we should make that like some sort of like cop car fraud mobile thing. So I was like, honestly, all you guys need to do is just put like fraud on the front of it and slap like a little light, and then have some sirens go on in the background. We'll take it from there. So it was a little bit of a combination, but LG's been awesome because and I'll let Spaceman tell you about it too, but they've been great because, I mean, they have given us like almost full creative control over that stream. I mean, everything that happens on that stream now is because of is a brainchild of myself, Spaceman, or Britton, our producer. I mean, hell, even Alex, the CEO, is throwing out ideas sometimes of Luminosity. He's just like, you guys should do this. We're like, great idea. Let's do it. Like, throw it in there. We don't care. I'll do it whenever.
Yeah. When the season kind of first started, Will, who is the social media manager over at Luminosity, who I've known for a long time, they really like, they just kind of had this idea for the show. Originally the show they wanted to do was like just kind of super baseline, super homery, and it followed kind of the Rogue HQ style. So they reached out and they wanted to do like basically a Rogue HQ again. But kind of given the situation and like it seemed that they were open to ideas and stuff. The first thing that I thought of was just like, all right, like if they have the resources, this could be something really, really disturbing. So let's do it. So I I immediately was like, all right, I got the guy. Like, I said, like, if I have some control here, like, give me Corelli. I have an idea. Let's go. And they were really open about things. And then as soon as Corelli got in, yeah, like it just kind of everything kind of just happened. It's everything that the show's kind of became or whatever is super. Some of it's been pre-planned, some of it's like we've had ideas cooking for a while that we wanted to do and like things, but a lot of it was just off a whim. Like it just in the moment, if it seemed funny enough to do, we would just throw it out there and it worked. Will has been like really, really responsive to all ideas, and like he is our front line on social media. Like he's the guy that like has to go talk to Alex, our CEO. He's the guy who has to figure out what works, what doesn't. So having him on board and like him thinking things are funny or like what works has been really awesome because it allows us to have this relationship with the org that is both really organic, but also they trust us to do things, and that's rare. But yeah, I mean, like the show, everything on the show is either something that we've like obviously like we thought of and we thought how can we implement this better, or it's something on a whim that just seemed funny, like the graphics package of the trash can decal, like that just our graphics guy just made that, and we're like, okay, that's funny, let's just do it like day of. So yeah, I mean, it's the biggest blessing with LG has just been the freedom that they give us. They trust us to do our job. And I when we went in originally, it was basically like I said, like I want to do the show that I want to do. And this was like before Corelli came on, and like I had been pushing for us to do it together. And I was like, look, if you're gonna give us kind of control here, I want us to be able to do the show that we want to do. And like this is exactly the way I'm thinking about it. This is what I know that this is why I want him, and like what Corelli brings that I can't get from other people, and like this style only works if he's here and if Will's the one helping, and if like our graphics guy is like doing this, and if we have Britain on production who trusts us. So it's like it was very much a big risk for LG because they needed to trust me and trust everybody else who was bringing on. And then as soon as we got people in place, I mean, it just kind of took off. So I'm grateful to LG for how they've allowed us to do our job, because we
Yeah.
casters know the community. We know what's
Yeah.
funny to an extent, but we know, like, we know how to get people talking and how to like do stuff. And we like making products, so it's been cool to be producers on this show and to have that credit as well. So yeah, it's just been a really fun time.
Yeah, so you're saying that if somebody has 7 years of professional experience, you can
Oh
trust
no.
them.
Okay, yeah,
Kind
that's
of a risky
the
take.
Yeah.
that was the thing when Spaceman was like, "Hey, I got this LG thing. We might do it." I was like, "Dude, I don't know if I really want to do it unless like we do it the way obviously that he was going to do it." But because the thing is, just to get again some more caster philosophy here, but the thing is like the if you look around all the RLCS like team streams, they're all doing the same thing, which is not a bad thing, right? They got their own little designs and everything like that. And but the thing is like everyone's just sitting there casting. And that's great, especially for a lot of the guys that are like up and coming and like want to show off their casting ability. It's a perfect time to do that. I would never tell someone to not do that. But none of them were entertaining. None of the shows were entertaining. The gameplay was entertaining. And the casting was fine. But the show was not entertaining. And something that we realized, especially after our first show, was like that was one of the first times I came off any Rocket League broadcast, especially after being on RLCS for so long, minus CRL, because CRL is different. But it actually reminded me of CRL because of how like
Chaotic and wild it is.
fun, chaotic, like the casters were allowed to do things. And kind of not be like super professional. And, it's good that our LCS is like that, of course.
Mhm.
But we were given a lot longer of a leash. And one of the things that I've hated as feedback, but from anyone on anything towards talent is like, they'll always say, don't make it about you. It's not about the talent. And the thing is, of course, it's not about the talent. No talent walks in there saying, oh yeah, I'm going to make this show about me now. But the thing is, and this is the thing I always tell people, is the best talent always make it about themselves, and they always make it more entertaining. And my perfect example is Mr. Stacks, aka Sean Stackhouse.
Yep.
If you go and you look at what he does for those majors, that is all about Stacks. The way he looks, the way he talks, the way he delivers his lines. That was something that he's been asking for Psyonix for such a long time. That entire thing is a Stacks thing.
Yep.
People are looking forward to Stacks saying those lines, not about who he's saying. Of course, it's going to be great, but people want Stacks. If I go and do that, everyone's going to be like, "Where's Stacks?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a perfect example of, yes, if you make it about yourself and you add value. And of course, we're there celebrating LG. We're talking about Reddles. We're giving nicknames to Cheese and Magic Bear. And I mean, we are just their biggest fans on that. Of course, we're making it about the teams. Of course, we're making it about LG. We're asking for gifted subs. We're telling people to buy the decal.
We're really paying the rent.
We're paying the rent right now. Not really, but we're gassing them up. I mean, we're doing our job as talent to do that. But we are also main characters in that. And I think it's a perfect example of when you let your talent kind of off the chain a little bit, and they're allowed. You make the boundaries just a little bit wider, and you allow them to kind of be themselves, talk about themselves. I mean, we cut away from gameplay to go to us. I mean, it's like a sin to do that, right? But like people love it, and so it's a perfect example of like when you try to make an entertaining show and you let casters who have a lot of. I mean, we have decades of experience now, especially with Spaceman. Spaceman's been here forever. Decades of experience of this kind of stuff on small shows, big shows. We know. Talent know maybe better than anyone because we're on the front lines of those shows, and we know we've been on shows that suck and we've been on shows that are great, and we know what works and what doesn't work, and we're not perfect, but we know what will be an entertaining show. And I think that LG show is definitely something that proves that, at least between Spaceman and I's brainchild.
Yeah. So speaking of getting an even longer leash, I want to do a roast of Rocket League. Like it would be so much fun to
You
like.
you get some. I don't know why I thought of Asher immediately, but you can get
Oh yeah,
some
like
people.
yeah, like this idea kind of came about because I'm a little bit of a troll on Twitter, and
Yeah.
Incorrect Esports like posted something where they were just like Turbo and Flitz have like this or like Flitz has been to Gamers 8 twice and Turbo's like never been there. And I
Mhm.
was just like, but don't they have the same number of series wins?
Oh man.
And I'm just, like I'm a troll. Like it's all
Sure.
meant in good fun
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And I was just like, okay, that was actually kind of funny. But two, like, gosh, there is so much that we could roast each other on, like in the Rocket League community. Like,
Yeah.
I've been working on a bit. It's like, I mean, imagine if we talked about how Leth has been an unpaid intern for the past 5 years.
Yeah.
Like there's so many things. Like we always
Yeah.
blame our teammates in ranked, and Garrett G went through 4 different teams before he won a world championship, and so like a true North American, he's
Yeah.
thinking about, it really is my teammates holding me back.
Yeah.
Like there's so many like
There's
things that we could
dimensions to it.
poke
Yeah.
fun
Yeah.
at in the Rocket League community, and then also like get to know the players better, and
Yeah.
not just be like, oh, he's the guy who like did the ceiling shot, and he's the guy who brought the flip reset in, and
Yeah.
he's this really good ones guy,
Mhm.
It's how you position it. I think a lot of the times. I think where people get caught up, and this is very much about like you got to know how, and knowing how to push the envelope comes down to the practice of it, but also like knowing when to not go as far as you think you can, and how to read the engagement of the audience. But like, uh, the balance between being pushy and being professional is something that talent are very good at. Like when we're on the LG stream, like we're saying these kinds of outlandish things, and like we're poking fun at players when it's appropriate. But we also know how to pull it back and be professional. Like I never did Rogue HQ at an RLCS LAN. There's just no way in hell that I'd do that. So like it's just you have to know how to do it. You have to know how to like, especially if you're doing like a roast of Rocket League, you have to know how to preface it, and then if you're gonna punch, you got to counter punch. If I'm gonna punch with one of the first things I said was like when it was we were playing G2 at the time, and I think Rizzo was still playing,
Mhm.
and Rogue was playing them, and I was like, um, Rizzo missed the net just like he did at Season 7 Worlds. How's that grand finals feel? Like that, if you're gonna punch,
Huge.
when you come back around, you have to, if you're going to be professional, you have to punch the right way and be in like, give the players their props, contextualize it properly, and give reasoning behind why you're complimenting them. And so it's like, and this is all in service of basically saying that roast can always work. I'm a big fan of like poking fun at things either serious or not serious. But it's for a lot of the community, I think they struggle with balance. And
Mhm.
for how we position it, it's literally just how do you put out those comments, and then how do you back it up? Because same thing like with LG, it's like, hey, we can say something about a player on Dignitas, and people are like, oh my god, I can't believe like you'd say that, blah, blah. But we're also the very first people that if they do something right, we're going to be like, hey, this was like
Yeah.
props to them, here's what they did right, and then we'll give you like their history, we'll give you all the good things about them, we'll be professionals. But it's just, you got to know how far you can push the envelope with certain things. And I would love, I think it just takes time. The community's got to warm up to certain things, because I mean, you can make fun of anybody and they're going to be like, oh my god, I can't believe you'd say that, you do that. And it's like, dude, like you also have to know who to pick too, because like you
Yeah.
don't want to
Yeah, I
go
was
for
gonna
like a kid
say.
who's like 15. Like that's weird.
Yeah.
Like I'm not gonna like make fun of Zen, but like, like for my instance, like hello, Clayster, he's like what, 28. So I'm be like,
Mhm.
Clay, you're old. Like it's
Yeah.
you gotta pick your battles. But yeah,
I would
I think
definitely start with talent. Like I would
yeah,
start with talent,
yeah.
like a
Yeah.
Gibbs or something. Throw Gibbs
Like
up there.
Tubi's like 37, man. Like what the hell's going on
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
or like, you could do like a turbo pulsa and stuff like that. He knows. Like
Yeah.
yeah, it depends on the age. I like the idea. It's an idea that's been toyed with a little bit by other people too. But they always came to the conclusion that it wouldn't, even if this event went well, it would incite people to be mean. So but
Yeah. And I think like
but yeah.
that's the way to do it too. Like you have to like even within like those two that I did make. It's like I'm making fun of Garrett for winning a world championship. You know,
Right.
like it's like that's obviously poking fun at that.
Yeah.
And then Leth being an unpaid intern, it's like he's got like what the second or third largest YouTube channel. He recently flew out to San Diego for some reason, and
Nice.
and now Errol is suddenly in rocket racing the next week. I mean,
Yeah.
like
Exactly.
there's a way to do it, and then also the difference is like both Garrett G and Leth, like they're full grown adults.
Yeah.
So it's like
They
I
can
feel
handle
like
it.
there's enough.
They got the
people in
history
this-
behind them, man. They got the
Yeah.
accomplishments. Like, if I ever make fun of Garrett, and like I know Garrett, he's a really nice guy. Like,
Oh, yeah.
we're friends. Like, no, if I ever make fun of him, it's either in jest or I'm like, yeah, I can make fun of him because he has a world championship and he's a multi-time champion. He's got all these things. Like, if you have the accolades to back it up, it's way easier to make fun of somebody. Because I'm like, dude, at the end of the day, you smoke me
Yeah.
on anything important. Like,
Yeah.
you still blew the open net. So like, what's the deal? So it depends.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Garrett G, like I think he's the only person outside of my team that like welcomed me into the like scene. Like
Yeah,
very first
he's a good
scrim
guy.
like against
He's a nice dude.
NRG, he was just like, "Hey, haven't seen you before. Welcome to the scene." I was like, "Awesome." Like,
Yeah. He's a nice dude. He's a
Yeah.
good guy.
So I guess is there anything else that you guys want to talk about before we close out?
We talked about a lot, honestly.
Major this week. London just got announced. Copper box again for Major 2, but the Major this week. Excited to see how things go, man. Like, not just for the gameplay, because that's always NA, EU, good lord, again. But I'm excited to see how production's going to look this year. Just as a fan of the game and, person who loves the product. Like, I'm excited. I know Crowley probably is too. Like, we want to see what Blast is going to do. We want to see how the intros will be, what the stage is going to look like, what the desk is going to be. I am very, very excited to see how the actual show itself looks, runs, feels, all that stuff. Because that's what I care about. What Crowley cares about is our product. So I'm really interested to know kind of like what's different, what's changed, what's the land going to look like, what are the lights going to be like. So I don't know. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I think with Blast history, I think it's got a good chance. I think this first one's going to be a little meh, but I don't think it's going to be like this massive step back like people are fearing.
Blast are very good. Yeah, no. This will be a good showing for them.
Yeah, it'll be good. It'll. I don't think that Blasts are going to be able to do anything that EFG couldn't, because EFG and Blast are going to be bottlenecked by resources, obviously.
Yeah.
So whatever Blast is able to do, I think EFG would have been able to do too. It's obviously going to come down to price of the production. But for the Major though, I think I'm excited to see, at least for the one in Denmark, excited to see how that one is set up, like Spaceman said, and I'm excited to see the crowd too in Denmark.
Yeah.
Because we've been close, but we've never been in that area, so that'll be fun. And then of course London got announced today as well, and they announced. I just saw it too. I just scanned Twitter real quick. They announced major decals, which is pretty cool. I don't think they've had that before, if I'm reading this post correctly. Maybe I'm crazy, but
didn't they have like rewards, like wheels at one point, but that was it.
they had rewards, but I think they're actually releasing decal. I could be wrong about
this
this.
is the first time it feels like they've had decals, which is cool. And if they do that for every major, hey, that's awesome. That's cool.
Yeah, we've released major themed items available in the shop now through April 2nd. So that's pretty cool because
are they free?
I don't know. They're in the shop, so I don't know. I'm hoping they're not. I'm hoping that people buy them. That'd be good.
Yeah. It would be cool if that money went to the orgs or. But,
Yeah. Hey.
Yeah,
My paycheck.
Why'd I say that? Okay. So how you guys doing? Major 2, London, Copper Box. What are your feelings though? Going back to the Copper Box, like everybody was speculating kind of what the deal was going to be. I'm neutral. Like, what are you feeling?
I think it's good to go do something that's historically worked. Like, especially with all that the community has been like screaming about, being like,
Sure.
terrible decision this, terrible decision that, like being like, okay, everybody likes the Copper Box. Let's do the Copper Box because we know the community likes that.
Sure.
So I think even if there's a lot more steps to take, I think it's at least a step in the right direction. I
Safe
still think
bet,
we need
neutral
at
bet.
least. I think we at least need a day 2 crowd, if not, if anything, like a wild card at like we did at Dallas, like
That
a
was a good
smaller,
wild card. Yeah.
Yeah,
like just
like
a like
1,000 seats.
yeah, like even if it's just a smaller event for the super fans, you know.
I still think they should do the Call of Duty open bracket thing where they set up the tables and fans
Yes.
just standing all around
Oh
them.
my
and
god,
stuff like
yes,
that.
dude.
I know
Oh.
players would probably hate that because they're not used to it because they're so far away from the fans in Rocket League. But you go to like a Halo event and look at the open bracket Call of Duty event, you see the open bracket setups. It's a stage, but then it's it's just a pit. And like, oh man, that would be a crazy. I mean, imagine sitting behind like your favorite team, literally with their head right in front of you, watching over their screen. Obviously, they could have some section. It's like what DreamHack did. DreamHack had the same stuff. And they had a little sectioned off area, so it's not like they're like on top of them. But because I mean, at Call of Duty and Halo events, they're like literally on top of them. But
Yeah.
you could section them off and have their screens facing out. And I think that'd be awesome. Again, I think players would hate it, but you know, sometimes it's not always about the players for a product like this. And I think that would be a brilliant thing for them to do. But as always, that costs money. So
Yeah, I think if I could do anything like as far as like Rocket League, like to enhance the show in some way, this would cost an abysmal amount of money because like the technology barely even exists. But imagine like pulling into like the stadium and you're sitting in your seat and you put on VR goggles, and then like after Stax makes his announcement, like the actual Rocket League arena like materializes in front of you, and you're actually watching the Octane go up the wall with the ball, and like it's like you're actually sitting in the stand like an egg.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
that would be amazing. Very cost prohibitive, but I think it would be awesome.
We've as a community for a long time. Well, okay, as a community for a while, we have been thinking and hoping of a day where like we get some real life artificial intelligence like projectors to like imagine you have the normal screen setup you have at events like at Worlds where you have the big screen but on the field like, you know, you have the stage, but imagine like there was a way to project the actual game so you could have it hovering above the players, and then you have, you know, you can watch the Octanes in the air flying after. Just that kind of idea would not only evolve the spectacle of esports overnight, but it would be, I mean, Rocket League's, the fact that it's a closed environment, it seems like to me as a layman brain, a very easy thing to potentially make, like just that spectacle. You know what I mean? You need VR goggles at that point. Just that spectacle of going in person and not just staring at the screen the whole time, but being able to actually watch the game happen live would be, I don't know. I just think about that and I'm like, damn, that would be the next evolution of what Rocket League could be as an esports. So, yeah, I think there's ways to improve the spectator experience across the board.
Yeah. So what's your crazy idea that if you had unlimited money, that you would do for like the Rocket League show itself?
Well, first of all, I would make like just majors longer, like more days. And I would also like have qualifiers for them. Like I always, like I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of open bracket stuff. Like if you can come out, like how DreamHack was, they'll have like invite teams, and then if you're able to get there and you're able to go through the open bracket or whatever, I think that's amazing. But as far as like you know, tech and stuff like that, I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious how big of it really comes down to how big of a stadium you know, we could sell. Right? Like, I don't know. I don't know if I guess if you had it in certain spots, maybe you could sell more tickets. But, you know, if we had a 30,000 stadium, would we be able to pack it? I don't know. Maybe in France, but I don't know about anywhere else. So, like, obviously, I want bigger and better stadiums and full stadiums at that. That's a big one for me. But like tech stuff, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that much. I just like having qualifiers, and I like having more teams there and longer events. Like like a League of Legends Worlds is like a month long or something like that, right? And they have like that whole open bracket thing that they do, or it's not open bracket, but it's like the lower seeds play through a play-in phase is what it's called.
Mhm.
I really enjoy the play-ins, and just watching, they have like Vietnam and Taiwan and like OCE all come out and play. There's a whole bunch more. But all these like little tiny, not tiny, but like smaller countries or smaller leagues are able to actually play in to the World Championship. I think that's something that'd be great for Rocket League. And yeah, we have the wild card. The wild card seems very like a very neat way of doing it. I feel like it could get a little bit more ugly. I feel like you could do a little something different, but that's what I would do. Is I just want bigger stadiums, more people there, bigger spectacle in that sense, and of course, as always, more teams. If I had unlimited money, I'd be inviting a lot of teams. So,
Yep.
Yeah. What about you, Spaceman? What would your big thing be?
I mean, I'm very big on like on culture and history and stuff. So, uh, I'm big on aesthetics. So I would deck out whatever stadium you get. Whether it's like, I would love if we got like a massive French theater, or like Stacks is throwing around the idea, like, imagine if Rocket League got like Madison Square at some point. But like, if we were gonna do something like that, like I would go like kind of what Curly said, go the full experience. Like, when we walked into CWL events, we had the banners of the teams that won, like 30-foot high banners of the team, the org, the logo, the players. Like, have first thing you do when you walk in the venue is you want that experience of a fan of being like, I'm stepping into history, I'm stepping into culture. Like, I want that. So, have that experience throughout the entirety of the event. Have an open bracket station where 64 teams enter. We have maybe top 12 teams are invited from the pro circuit, but you have like 18 teams overall. Have that open bracket passion pit. Allow fans to show up and watch their teams play early on. Have a separate broadcast for that. Um, have a unique stage, then transition those people into the main event. Have a main event hall. Have alleys where people can go, hang with creators. Go to an artist alley. They can go. Maybe there's a panel or something. Just like have things for people to do when the games aren't happening. And then really, really put money into the production of a show. Because if people go and they experience a show and they like watching it in person, they're going to want to hang around after matches. Like when San Diego kicked off last year and Stax did his intros and we had the lights going and Double Tap was like one of the first times it was playing, and like everything kind of came together. People were like wowed. They were like, whoa, like I Stax is doing these crazy intros, and like it feels like you have to be there. Like that FOMO is really big. And it's tough when people are always going to leave and stuff, but it's tough when fans feel like, why do I feel like I have to be there right now when I can just show up later and not miss much? So I would reinforce, spend the money on the budget on the venue, spend the money on the production, go as balls to the walls as possible, make it feel like this grand experience. And like Carly said, I'm a huge Passion Pit fan. Like, just give us an open bracket that lets players show up, make it feel like the old school MLG days, sitting there. Long days, doesn't matter. You want people to sign up. You want them to play. You want trash talk. You want all that kind of stuff. So just give people a place to compete, and everything else will happen. Everybody else will show up and watch. So just open brackets are a big reason why I love them. Just bring them back.
Yeah. So to quote that old classic movie, "Build it and they will come."
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. I think we had a lot of fun conversations today. If you're looking to find them, Spaceman and Corelli on Twitter. They're on the Luminosity stream every single regional or open qualifier or whatever it is we're calling it nowadays. Definitely go and check them out and send them love. It's always a fun time watching their stream.